Hi, this is a short video to talk to you a little bit about pivot table, the Power Pivot and Power View. This first part of it, we're going to talk about Power View and the Power Pivot. You've already done a pivot table. Excuse me. You've already done a pivot table, so you kind of know what those are all about. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take Chapter 24, Data Model and Power View.xlsx, and open it. We'll be working with that file. What we're going to do is talk more about the data model that I mentioned already. The data model is the they're trying to make Excel act a bit like Access. In other words, they're allowing you to put data into an Excel workbook that will have relationships. And you all understand relationships at this point. What we're going to do is, excuse me, try to find common fields among all the tables that we put in here. If you look at this particular file, you'll see that we've opened it on a calendar. Take a look at what's on here. What we've had to do with this calendar is play with it a little bit. We've got our data broken up a little bit into quarters, the fiscal year, the month of the quarter, a quarter name, as well as the full date. So we're able to use this in a particular way that we are unable to anywhere else. So we've had to do some fiddling around, separating out parts and pieces of the date. So what we want to do is take a look at the Data tab. And on the Data tab, look at the Data Tools group. And you're going to see something called Manage Data Model. So go ahead and click that. And this is where you're going to play around with your data model. And you'll see what happens with that momentarily, but you'll see we have some places to get external data, etc. Very much like we did before. You can get it from an Access database, for example, or other types of sources. But let's move this aside, and you can minimize yours, and we're going to go back to the Excel file. And what we're going to do is click somewhere in our calendar table. And notice we have a Power Pivot tab up here now. So click the Power Pivot tab and then go to the Tables group, and then click Add to Data Model. You're going to see a yellow ribbon that says that the data model has changed, and that should be expected. And over here, we're going to slide this back over here, and you can go and flip to yours. Here is Power Pivot, and we now have all the data from the calendar in our data model. Recall that when we do this directly from Access, you're given the choice of adding it to the data model, and this is what you'd be doing if you're getting your data directly from Access. So we're going to move this aside again. And then what you're going to do is let's go back to the Excel workbook, and we're going to repeat steps 5 and 6 to add the tables on the transactions, transaction details, and products worksheet. Add this to the data model and save the workbook each time it's added. These directions are on Chapter 24, page 11. 10 and 11. So that's where we're beginning. So I'm going to pause for a moment and let you do that, and we'll be right back. Okay, at this point you should have what you're seeing in front of you right now, which is the Power Pivot window, and you should have at the bottom the tables of data that we added to the data model. You have calendar, transactions, transaction details, and products. Okay, so we're in the Power Pivot window. Just kind of take a look and compare that to your regular old Excel file. And what we're going to do is click on the Design tab here. And then we're going to click in Relationships, Manage Relationships. And we'll get an additional window. Now you already understand all of the nuances of relationships, I hope. And so what you're able to do here is establish those so that Excel knows how to retrieve data. So let's click the Create button. And then in the first drop down, we're going to select Transaction Details. Okay, so there it gives you a sample of the data. And we're going to click the item code to select it. Okay. In the second drop down, what we want to do is create a relationship between our transaction details and products. You'll recall item code is the common field. Click OK, and that will establish the relationship between those two sheets of data, just like we did in Access. Following the directions toward the bottom of page 12, you can continue creating these relationships between transactions and transaction details using transaction ID, and transactions in the calendar table using the transaction date and date fields. I'll pause it so that you can get that done. Okay, you should have a list that looks very much like this, and just take a look at it. It should be fairly familiar. You should have something that goes from item code in transaction details in a many-to-one relationship to transaction details. Notice that we're not really worried about necessarily keys here, but I mean, we don't need to set the keys or anything, but it does establish the cardinality and the directionality of the relationships automatically. We don't necessarily have to tell it what to do. So click Close, and just take a quick look here. Go to the Home tab, and go all the way over to the right under the View tab, and let's click Diagram View. And if you remember or are reminded unpleasantly of a relationship window here, like we see in Access, and you can play around with this a little bit. So it looks very familiar. It should look very familiar. So what this means is we can do some more fun stuff with Power Pivots. So let's go ahead and go back to Data View, and then let's talk about creating formulas. Okay, so Power Pivot uses a type of function known as a DAX function. These are data analysis expressions. They're kind of a cross between Access calculations that we do in a query, for example, and an Excel formula. And the related DAX function will allow you to look up data in another table in the data model, much like with, for example, a VLOOKUP. You should love that. Okay. So there is no calculation for revenue. So Premier calculates its revenue using, remember, quantity times catalog price times 1 minus discount percent. Remember that formula. So normally what you would do is you'd reference cells in an Excel workbook to do this kind of a formula and retrieve this from all the tables with VLOOKUPs. So instead, we're going to do something a little different in the Excel data model, and we're going to use a function called related. You can tell Excel to use the connection that we established in the DAX functions, and then we can use a common field to find the appropriate catalog price. So, in your worksheet here, where are we here? We're going to be in transaction details. Okay, I'm just going to kind of minimize this a little bit so you can see it better. My little taskbar is in the way, and I'm going to have to figure out why it's talking to me right now, but we should be in transaction details. It should look like that. And we're going to select the column titled Add Column, and then click into the formula bar. And we're going to type the following formula. Notice the brackets, square brackets, quantity, and it completes it for you, and then times, and then the DAX function related. And take a look at what happens when I hit the tab, related, and we're going to go in there with the parentheses and do products catalog price. We can just double click it and close the parentheses, times, and then in parentheses 1 minus discount percent. We don't need that closing parenthesis, so we shouldn't. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Sorry. I don't know what I'm thinking. There we go. Now, there it is. We've finished it, and there it is. It says calculated column 1, and there are all our calculations. So the calculation is automatically applied to the whole column, so you don't even have to think about it. It goes all the way down to the bottom. With the column selected as it is, we want you to right click and choose rename column, and we're going to call this revenue. Okay, so that's basically how you would use a DAX function to create a subtotal in your PowerPivot sheet.